So the first Battlefield 6 beta has finished, and one of the biggest complaints that I've actually seen from the beta is regards to overall map size, with many saying that the maps are too small as a result of being in combat pretty much all the time. So I wanted to have a little bit of a discussion around that, because yes, we did have some pretty small maps in this beta, but it's not ultimately representative of the finished game and what all maps will be like. Now, if you want to see more Battlefield 6 content like this, be sure to subscribe to the channel. I'm going to be streaming the beta this weekend a lot more than I did last weekend, so make sure you don't miss out. Now, speaking of beta number 1, we had 3 maps in total, and they were Iberian Offense, Liberation Peak, and Siege of Cairo. Liberation Peak was by far the biggest map and easily the most open of those 3, with Iberian Offense and Siege of Cairo being completely urban, with many different buildings to enter and destroy. A couple of these also had objective points to hold, like the C flag on Iberian Offense, with the vast majority of the flags being in more open areas like across a street or in some kind of square, or just on the edge of a map by a big anti-aircraft gun. And I would say that was at least probably 90% of all of these capture points. Now, I think it is absolutely fair to say that Iberian Offense and Siege of Cairo in particular are on the smaller side of Battlefield maps that many are used to playing, but I do however think that is very easy to say because we've just come from Battlefield 2042 over the last few years, which have some pretty mega maps in scale, obviously as a result of the bigger player numbers, with it being 128 players, whereas Battlefield 6 goes back to the traditional 64. Now, with that being said, previous Battlefield games did of course have some pretty big maps, but they also did have a wide variety in maps being smaller. For example, Flood Zone in Battlefield 4 isn't very big, and it was also very urban, so it's not one of these big, grandiose, sprawling maps. And Flood Zone is probably similar in size to Siege of Cairo and Iberian Offense. Some may argue that that is a bigger map, but that might just be because it's quite long and narrow rather than being a bit short and stubby. But the point being there is that Battlefield has always had a variety in maps, so us playing on some smaller urban scale ones in this beta shouldn't really come as much of a surprise. And we did of course have Liberation Peak, which was a lot more open and certainly bigger in size. I think it also felt bigger just because it was a lot more open. You could see the C flag from F very easily, and you could see pathways down there. And as a sniper, there are a lot of different points to go to, which I really enjoyed. But if you now take a look at the map list, bigger maps are certainly on the way, with the likes of New Sobek City, Mirak Valley, and of course the return of Operation Firestorm, which is a classic map from Battlefield 3. These maps, from what we've seen thus far, all seem a lot bigger and more open than the likes of Iberian Offense and Siege of Cairo, so I don't really think people need to get too concerned. I totally understand why people felt that these maps were too small for the typical Battlefield experience that you might be used to, because I think when you say Battlefield, a lot of people do assume all-out warfare, big maps, jets, helicopters, tanks, and so on. And of course we didn't really get that too much because Siege of Cairo and Iberian Offense were just infantry and tanks, so for many it probably didn't feel like that really typical Battlefield experience. But I personally had no issue with it at all. I really enjoyed that I wasn't too far away from combat at all times, even on Liberation Peak with that being a bigger map. I was never too far away, but I certainly had to have a little bit more time to rest and chill out. I know people prefer to have that sort of break in gameplay sometimes whilst actually playing the game. They go through a big phase of combat and then want to chill. I totally get that. And I personally did find that that would often happen, especially when playing Conquest. You could be on some crazy push for a capture point. You capture it and then it is a lot more chilled out, especially if you're playing with a squad. But I do also get that there are going to be times where you are just non-stop going at it for 20 minutes, because I certainly had my fair share of that as well. I think the beauty of what the team over at the Battlefield Studios are doing with Battlefield 6 though is making something that suits many different players, with a number of bigger maps and of course some smaller ones as we've already experienced. But like I've already referred to earlier in the video, this is something that has been a part of the series for a very long time, so I really don't feel as though this should come as any shock. But again, 2042 has just happened and they were all pretty mega maps, so I think that is a big part of why people feel the way they do. Now I think it's also worth noting that so far we have only played 3 maps, 2 of which probably are on the smaller side of the game. So we still have 6 that we haven't played yet. Now that number will go down to 5 after the second beta in just a couple of days, thanks to the introduction of Empire State. Now Empire State is listed as an infantry only map as well, so no tanks, no helicopters or anything like that. We haven't experienced that just yet, but that also means it will probably be a fairly small map and won't help with the case of people complaining about maps being too small in this game. But again, bigger maps are coming at launch. I know it's something that people would love to experience now, but it could quite simply be a case of these bigger maps may not really be ready. And actually in a beta like this, they really just want to get a big sense of gameplay flow, as much statistics as possible around weapon balancing, vehicle balancing and so on, which means that having these smaller, more focused infantry and just combat zones rather than having a 2-minute walking simulator before getting into some combat will actually help DICE with the telemetry and data collection far more, because there is simply more going on. Now that is just a theory that I've just come up with on the spot there, so probably not true. But in saying that, I don't really think map size should be much of a thought. It is ultimately around the overall level design and gameplay flow that makes maps what they are. And for me personally, I think all 3 that we played in the beta are really enjoyable, but maybe that is because I don't mind being in combat on a very regular basis. Naturally, being someone who enjoys being in combat so often, I think it's easy for me to defend the size of the maps and how you're in combat all the time without hearing too much of the other side other than where maps too small. So I would genuinely love to hear what you think about the maps in the comments, and we can have a bit of a discussion in there about them. I do totally understand wanting to have a bit more of a breathing time, but I think in that you can also change your playstyle slightly as well. You can play these maps a bit slower if you want to, or you can be a bit like me and a bit hot-headed and just run into combat. So whilst these maps are on the smaller side, this is nothing new to Battlefield. Your playstyle ultimately will determine how often you're going to be in combat. And of course, bigger maps are on the way at the full launch of the game, so please do not take your beta experience as representative of all of the maps that are coming to the game, because that is just not going to be accurate. I think this really stems out onto a topic about server browser and custom playlists and so on. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that in another video probably next week. But anyway guys, let me know what you think about the map sizes in the comments below and whether you're excited for the second beta this weekend. That is it from me today though. Thank you all very much for watching, and I'll see you out there on the battlefield.